here we go.
Yep. Feels like I haven't done one of these in a while either.
It's been 2 weeks.
Feels like it's been longer. I don't know why. I don't know why.
You're weird.
No, it was a nice break, to be honest. Not doing this last weekend was actually nice, just to be able to kind of get up and do the whole thing like we usually do with the boys down there in PA. That was a good time. That was fun. It was just a weird.
We're live, by the way.
Oh, okay. It was.
Good morning, Barbara.
Oh, hey. I was going to say, but it was a weird. It was a weird weekend, but it was good. It was good. Be back. The blood flowing here. God, it's cold today.
I know.
I'm gonna bitch about the cool, like I bitch about the heat. Bitch.
That's all you do. Yeah. Anyway, so we were back and live again. No new episode this week, but we will be recording Cheat Mountain this week. Good morning.
Next week.
Morning, Ben. Morning, Lynn. Morning, Glow Jim.
Next week we shall be recording.
Ben says, "Good morning. It's hot in Dallas."
Yeah, it's always hot in Dallas. It's like 60 degrees here. It's nice. It's like raw, but it's been cool out, so I'm not going to complain because it's been such a hot and wet summer, and I'm more of a fall guy. Hence the pumpkin beers season, Mary.
Well, yes,
right?
It won't show up on the camera, but anyway, yes, I have Elysian Night Owl Pumpkin Ale, which is.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, but I'm looking forward to recording, and we're going to be scheduling the round table here soon.
This Wednesday at 7:30 Eastern. We will be doing it. We'll bring we took a few months off just because we were so busy and stuff, and with summer and all that. But yes, if you've never attended our round table before, we'll post some details about it like on social media and all that. But yeah, Civil War Breakfast Club at gmail.com if you'd like an invite, and it's just via Zoom, and we get together and nerd out about the Civil War for an hour and a bit.
And then we'll mention this at some point, but we got the book club coming up with Tom Huntington.
We have
Maine at Gettysburg.
We have like 3 more book clubs, and we've got to kind of put them all into the next few months.
Someone needs to get her ass in gear and email these authors. Schedule this.
You have access to the emails too.
Actually, no, I looked for those and I couldn't find them. So we talked about that this morning, as a matter of fact. But we'll get that scheduled. So book club roundtables coming up.
Yeah.
And then we got the book clubs coming up, and we got some more stuff coming down the road. But it'll be nice to record. It's been a couple of weeks to record it. So the last one we did was was it the New York draft riots?
No, we did. What was our last episode? It was New York draft riots was the one before. I can't remember what it was now.
No, it just shows what a busy, crazy last 2 weeks in our lives, especially my life, has been. So it's good to get back at it again.
Yeah, but Cheat Mountain's coming up. We talked last night. We're going to do for the 160th at Chickamauga. We're going to do an episode specifically focusing on Minty and Wilder and what they did on September 18th, 1863, with holding back the Confederate Army.
And September is obviously a big. I can't believe it's. First of all, I cannot believe it's already September almost. Yeah. That's freaking crazy. But we have a lot of stuff in September, obviously, to talk about. Certainly, there's the this Cheat Mountain, like you said, the Chickamauga stuff you mentioned. Of course, is Antietam. There's all kinds of stuff. I
definitely want to focus on like Chickamauga though, because I feel like it's not going to get the love that Gettysburg got for its 160th. And Chickamauga is just like, after Gettysburg is like my favorite battle to study. Oh, good morning, David.
Hey,
also
David.
In September,
that's right.
We are going to be doing the event with the Civil War Museum in Harrisburg.
Yeah, that's going to be a busy September. So if you haven't signed up for that, I think it's something to look into. And it's their fist. I think it's their annual fundraiser. To be honest, they do a lot of stuff, but it's people are dressed up in period clothes, and Civil War period, not just like a period.
Miranda said it was Battle Crater, and that's right. We totally forgot to mention this, but thank you, Allie K. She said happy anniversary, Civil War Breakfast Club. That's right. It's our 3-year anniversary.
It is.
Yeah, I think tomorrow is the official anniversary.
Put up with your ass for 3 years on this. Yeah,
so
3 years.
It's
it's so funny. We'll get into this all this stuff in a second, but it's so funny when you think back about how this whole thing just kind of got started with us with this. It's just funny. It's just one of those things that's kind of cool.
But I think 3 years tomorrow, August 28th, was when we dropped the first episode.
Our infamous "I'm an IPA girl" episode.
Oh God.
So fucking bad.
You and your what was it like? Oh yeah, we're going to talk about pop culture.
We do talk about that quite a bit, though. We do. No, but that'll be fun. But if you get a chance to get to Harrisburg, do it because there's going to be a lot of cool people there. I'm I'm just excited to see the night artillery firing.
That'll
That'd be
cool.
cool as hell to see that.
That'll be cool. Ryan mentions that he's reading about World War II Soviet cavalry commanders studying the Civil War and cavalry raids. Who knew some commissars were big Forrest fans? That's interesting, actually. David said he's reading the book Campaign of Giants about Petersburg, and he said the author does not like Old Snapping Turtle at all.
No, you'll
on here. Good morning, and she said congrats on 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you to everybody who's like, we wouldn't be able to do this without our listeners. Like, that's the thing. And we
could. It would be us, but
I know, but I mean, the support has been awesome, and especially like we've been doing these. I mean, like, you know, when we first started, we did them on Facebook, and then we switched over to YouTube. But these live streams, we've been doing them for 3 years as well, and they're a lot of fun.
We were doing this for a lot longer than 3 years, though. We just didn't have anybody else involved. It was just us doing this stuff.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. But it's fun. But no, there's a lot of cool stuff. Yeah, but the snapping turtle thing. There's a lot of people. It's funny how polarizing George Meade actually is. You wouldn't think he would be. You've got people who like Gelzo who don't particularly like him, and you got people like Masterson Brown who worship the ground he walks on. Yeah, and it's just funny. I mean, I like Meade. I think he's one of the best generals this country ever came up with, as far as what he did. The fact that I don't want to say subjugated his command when Grant came east, but he kind of did in a way. And when you look at, it reminds me of Cheat Mountain when Robert E. Lee got his first field command. This is what we're going to talk about in this episode coming up this week, was September 12th, 1861, somewhere right around there. He is going to kind of take over command in a similar way that Grant did. And this is when Lee was very passive. And because of that, he allowed a lot of things to happen. And we'll talk more about the details of no one studies Cheat Mountain, first of all. Let's just call it like it is, right? But it's interesting because it's kind of like a test run for a lot of things that came later on. Yeah. If you're interested in studying this aspect of the battle, which that Western Virginia thing, Rich Mountain, Cheat Mountain, all the Pocahontas County, all that stuff. Yeah. Eric Wittenberg has a really good book on this. On basically West Virginia, and you can kind of learn how the whole thing was. And the reality is the state is created because of the Civil War, because where the part of the state was, it was close to Ohio, a lot of the railroads. The Union wanted to keep it, and there were a lot of loyalists there because the economy with Ohio, and how the whole thing kind of plays itself out. McClellan's a star there. He gets pulled out there. And then you got guys like Joseph Reynolds, not John Reynolds, Joseph Reynolds, Mary, who's up there. And you get guys like Kimball. But what's fascinating was it's just the way the whole thing kind of goes, because it sets up things that are going to come. And Robert E. Lee, he doesn't look good with this. No. And when this whole battle, and the first of all, the Battle of Cheat Mountain is kind of a oxymoron, so it really wasn't a battle. It was they got up. There's a guy named Albert Rust, and he's in charge of the 3rd Arkansas. And the Gettysburg people recognize the 3rd Arkansas because of Jerome Robertson. They fought against Wheeler's 20th Indiana. But now that was under Van Manning, because Rust was gone. Rust finds a secret path to get to Cheat Mountain. Yeah. And he's like, can I please lead the attack, Roberts? And he's like, okay. And then, of course, he falls on his dick and never attacks. The whole thing falls apart. But because of that, Lee has to go back. He goes back to the Carolinas, starts working on the defenses of the coastal. And this is where the nickname Granny Lee starts, because they just thought that he just the prey to pass him by. But Lee learns from this. And you can see that the lessons of Cheat Mountain when he gets later on, especially when you get to things like Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. So you can't teach an old dog new tricks, Mary. No. You can teach old Bobby Lee learned. But you know what, he did not, one thing he didn't change though, he still was that macro manager. Like we saw at Gettysburg, where he didn't sit there and say, well, Albert Rust didn't do this right, or Henry Jackson didn't attack the way I want him to do it. So he didn't turn into Stonewall and just entrench and tell these guys. He still kind of said, just do it. I don't care how, just do it. So he kept that part of his personality, but a lot of the Lee stuff, really he learned from that. So that's what's good about you can learn a lot about the bigger later battles from studying
by studying the smaller. Yeah, because the generals kind of like what they go through there. Just some comments here. David said, congrats on the 3 years. This podcast was a huge part of me getting through COVID. That's awesome to hear. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. That's kind of what it was for us too, though.
Yeah,
it was
how we, cope with getting through the pandemic. Ben says he just completed Burke Davis's Stonewall book. Ryan mentions that Frank Burney's an author, manages to polarize people on Grant. That's definitely true. Miranda says that she's reading Make Me a Map of the Valley, the Civil War Diary of Jedediah Hotchkiss. Scott says, congrats. David said the book he's reading, that the guy doesn't like mead. He said he and Kent Masterson Brown would have a death cage match over me.
Like watching, if you watch it, Hessler and me and Brown get together, talk about old Uncle Dan.
Oh God. AQ mentions that she's going to be in Gettysburg in September and she hopes to attend the Cocktails and Cannons. Bob says, good morning from North Carolina.
Hey.
And regarding, hey MJ, good morning. And then Ryan mentions that the other great characters in early West Virginia, like McClellan, Rosecrans, Lee, August Willich.
Yeah, Rosecrans, this is where his star starts to rise too. And it's funny because after Manassas and everything, and after Cheat Mountain, the two stars on the Confederacy, it wasn't Robert Lee and Stonewall Jackson. Jackson was on his way, but who was it? It was
Beauregard was one.
It was Beauregard and Joseph E. Johnston.
Yeah,
they were the apples of, they were the bells of the ball.
Oh yeah,
and this is all going. Of course, our history changes, things go on, and Jackson's star goes off, as Lee's. But Cheat Mountain's interesting because we mentioned Nathan Kimball. He's the only guy who defeated Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee in battle in the entire Civil War.
And he goes out to the Western Theater, and I think he's at Chickamauga, and he's on the March to the Sea. He's very nondescript, but I think he's at Chickamauga. I know for sure he's on the March to the Sea. Yeah,
he's one of those obscure guys. When you really get into the weeds of this, you really do. But I mean, when you look at and no one's heard of Albert Rust. I get that, but he was instrumental in that 3rd Arkansas we talked about that fought at Gettysburg on that second day because of the shit that he pulls here, he's gone. And then you got Van Manning come, like I said before, and so Van Manning's fighting with Jerome Robertson at Gettysburg. As part of that echelon attack, but that's how Van Manning gets there, and how Russ is gone. Again, it goes back to this too. Yeah. So it's cool. You can kind of follow the players as they go and where they come, where they drop off. I think those are the only 2 commanders of 3rd Arkansas ever had. I could be wrong, but I think it was just Rust and Manning. Mm-hmm. And Manning's attack at Gettysburg was great. They just had a perfect location. Old Wheeler in the 20th Indiana took one on the head there, and that was the end of him. But that was interesting about that. Yeah. But you can see you can see how a lot of these regiments who stuck with these battles were formed, and how their previous commanders kind of helped set the psyche of them. Yeah, because they were another one. They wanted to fight. Like I said before, we'll talk more about Cheat when we do this episode, but they wanted to fight. This was back when the war was just starting. They could figure you're just coming off Manassas. Now you can take West Virginia back, or take the western part of Virginia back, and then you could open up the door to Ohio. And God knows how much I love Ohio, Mary. That could have been the end of Ohio right there, But that's how it was. But when you study it, and the other thing that's fascinating about this one was Augustine Washington. Yeah, the great nephew of I don't know if you've heard, Mayor, of who George Washington is. He's an American general. Really? Yeah, he was someone who was famous here back in the day, and still is actually. Yeah, he's on the quarter. In case you're curious who he was, but his great nephew rather, he was the last living heir to Mount Vernon. Wow. And so he ends up being on Robert E. Lee's staff, and I always found this fascinating about this because. You go back to the Rev War, you had a Lee on Washington's staff. Yeah. This battle, you have a Washington on Lee's staff. That's interesting. So it's the exact opposite. Yeah. But unfortunately, he doesn't make it. No. He gets killed. He gets shot 3 times in the ass and dies. So he went the way Kearney did? He did. And that's no joke. That's how he died. He got shot in the ass 3 times, and that was it. And they didn't know he died right away. And then Lee said, hey, so we lost one of our guys. Yeah, he's dead. You want him back. And that was a big deal because back in the South, the politicians, this is what they killed Lee on. You got George Washington's great nephew killed. Yeah. He was an adjutant. He wasn't a soldier. He happened to be bumbling along. and he and another aide ended up kind of running and getting tricked into a skirmish on this. There was a Union soldier standing there and was whittling, picking daisies, what the hell he was doing. But they went to go capture him, and it was a setup, and they jumped on him. It was an ambush. And Washington gets killed there, and the Virginia newspapers were killing Lee for that. And so this is so when you think of Robert E. Lee in historical memory as this infallible rock star in the South, he was hated.
Yeah,
I mean, he was
kind
not
of an
popular
obscure figure until Joseph E. Johnson got wounded.
He was up until June 1st, 62, when Seven Pines happened, when he flipped the narrative of fighting defensively in and turned that into that 7 days. Until then, he was they called, like I said, they called him Granny Lee.
Yeah. Frank is on here. He says, good morning. It's like happy 161st anniversary of John Pope getting his Manassas kicked at Second Bull Run. That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
We did an episode of Second Bull Run.
And I'll tell you,
second episode.
I think it was our first real one.
Yeah.
Right. Second, I'm glad he mentioned that, because, Groveton and, obviously you lost his leg. And that if you go to Manassas, I'm a second Manassas guy versus the first one, just because it's the deep cut and you've got all that stuff. But the rise of the 6th Wisconsin and the Iron Brigade. Well, Howard was the first one too.
Oh, I know.
Howard got his ass kicked the first one. Yeah, he certainly do. But second Manassas is definitely the favorite, and similar results for the Union. John Pope, that was the end of him. And again, and then old Mac was back again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's well, speaking of like the AOP Army commanders, shockingly on Facebook, someone was challenging me on Burnside, because I said, they were talking about how Burnside only had like one really bad day in the Civil War and he shoulders way too much blame. And I'm like, Fredericksburg was not a good look for him. Or was it the Crater or something? And he's like,
you said the Crater.
Yeah. He's like, that wasn't Burnside's
That's what our last
fault.
episode was.
Yeah,
Was the Crater.
That's Miranda mentioned that. But he's like, that wasn't Burnside's fault. It was everybody above him, and it was Ledley's fault. And I just came back with like, well, Burnside told Ledley to go in because he drew the short straw.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the Crater and about Burnside, he up until Meade said you can't have the USCT guys go first. Yeah. He was perfect. He did everything right, and it was all set up to be his greatest moment. Yeah. But then when they said you got to pick the other guys, and he literally took it up to chance and picked the short straw, that's when everything went bad. And that's the thing that's mind numbing about history. When you look at this, as some of the biggest decisions made were think about it. It's kind of like you're going to the Super Bowl. Yeah. And you have three quarterbacks, and instead of picking the one with the best record, you just pick straws. Okay, you go play. I mean, not to make it simplistic like that, but that's kind of what he did.
It is.
And of course, Ledley gets hammered. He's drinking rum in the back of the bomb-proof there, by old Pooh Creek, and then the whole thing goes, ironically to shit. Yeah, like. But I was like, not, I will give him a pass on Fredericksburg insofar as it's not his fault the pontoons were late. Yeah. It's not fault. Although he did the mud march. Yeah. And the thing about the mud march was hilarious, was the weather is great until the day they go, and then it starts pouring. So he has that Charlie Brown in the football luck thing.
Oh, he does. Yeah.
But again, people remember what your failings, not your successes. That's the way life is nowadays. And so that's what happens. But he's buried up the street here in Rhode Island,
We should go see his grave.
He's actually buried right near Sullivan Ballou. Yeah. Speaking of First Manassas. Yeah. Right. He's on that same, and Elijah Hunt Rhodes is buried right near him too. The guy who wrote the diary there for the Union. And who else is buried there? There's a few other ones.
Warren's in Rhode Island too, but he's not at that cemetery.
No, he's over in Newport. But Rhode Island has a lot of Civil War. As does Maine. I mean, Mass does too. But when you go to Rhode Island, you go to it's kind of a who's who. There's one cemetery in Providence there, and it's kind of like a who's who of Civil War, like cool. A-listers. This was pretty cool.
We should definitely get there. We're not that far from. We're like an hour from Providence, right?
Less than that, about 45 minutes.
Yeah, we definitely need. Well, isn't their capital has like cannons or something from Gettysburg?
It has the from the first day's cannon, first day's battle. It has over Barlow's Knoll there. It has a cannon. It has got the cannonball stuck in it.
Yeah,
and it's right in the state capitol. You
Yeah,
can go and see
we'll
it. It's
have to
pretty
post our second Manassas episode because that's going way back in the playlist there. Like, and then our next episode after that was Atlanta, the taking of Atlanta.
Yeah, no,
Where we read those letters between Hood and
walked down memory lane,
Yeah. Bill said last time I had to draw straws, it was to detonate a nuke on an asteroid.
That's right. Another big historical moment. That one didn't. That one worked out though. They're lucky. That was a good one right there. But
yeah, and then trying to think of some of our other episodes that we did too. We did like Atlanta. We've done so many of them. Franklin. We did Franklin in our first year. That's our friends. The Sammys are touring Franklin right now, which is really cool.
Are. They're Lisa Sammy and Jim, husband of Lisa, they are tooling around Franklin, which is pretty cool. And they were down. Where the hell were they? They went somewhere else. I don't know. Maybe they didn't. I'm losing my mind, but I know they were in Franklin.
Oh, David said he and his wife are both planning on wearing period clothes for cocktails and cannibals. That's cool.
Yeah, that'll be a good time. Hopefully, a lot of people come out for that because I think, and it's going to be catered by Union Cigar is going to be there, so we can get our cigar on there.
Yeah.
And then I forget who else is. Some beer vendor is going to be doing that, but we're doing trivia and we've got books. Bjorn from Lincoln Bookshop is going to be sending us a bunch of really cool books that we're going to be handing out for this thing. And it's going to be a live trivia.
Yeah.
And what we say rules. So I don't want to hear any shit, Mary, from anybody about, I heard this, I heard that. We are the judge, jury, and executioner of the trivia. What we say goes.
Yeah.
But if you don't know, just guess Howard. You're probably going to be right.
Yeah.
Realistically.
We'll take Howard as an answer.
But that's going to be good. And I know a lot of people from this podcast are interested in going, which is great.
Yeah.
Mary Beth Craig.
The museum appreciates the support. The museum, the people at the museum are amazing. It was a year ago that we first started, we had a tour with them and all that. And it was really, really awesome.
No, they're just good people. We've got to know them quite well in this last year since we visited them. And we went up to that what was that place we went to with Mary Beth that day? That cider house in Gettysburg.
Oh, Reed Cider House.
Right. She's cool. But these are they're not book museum-y type people.
No, they make history fun and
they do. And if you've never been to the museum in Harrisburg, and it's shockingly, I hadn't been until we visited.
Yeah,
and if you go, it's amazing. The murals they have, the artifacts they have, it's very similar to the one in Richmond.
Yeah.
Although I think this one's better.
Yeah.
And what's good about it too is it's balanced. You're not going to go there and see all Union stuff because it's in Harrisburg. You're going to see they have a lot of Confederate stuff, and it's in their focus is on balance.
Yeah.
And so, but it's definitely
which is needed in the Civil War field. Balance is needed because some people are way too much one way or the other way, and it happens on both sides. And that's the one thing that
do you know, Mary, we get accused of both.
Yes, we have been accused in the 3 years of doing this podcast, we have been accused of being too Southern and then of being too Northern. And the too Northern comment came after we released our episode about Barksdale, which was funny.
You gotta be both. Last I checked, there are two teams on the field with us, and to sit there and say that we think guys like John Mosby or Beauregard or any of these guys, Gordon, are good people, or why we think, God forbid, saying Grant might have had flaws. You got to have it both ways. But it's fun though. But the people who attack us of being Southern are the ones that drive me crazy.
Oh same.
Some of these garden variety morons on Twitter. I guess it's X now.
Yeah.
Because we talk about about Patrick Claiborne.
Yeah.
That somehow we're
for the South because we study Claiborne or we read a biography about Beauregard or Beauregard as we call him. And the one that I've really started getting into, and it's because of his wife, because she doesn't really have a story, is Hiram Granberry. Yeah. I really am interested in him. It's because of you telling his story. But there's a few different versions of what his wife does. There's one version where she lives in Boston while he's a guest of the state of Massachusetts at Fort Warren. There's another story that he's in
by the way,
Maryland.
It's Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Get it right.
Commonwealth. Sorry.
State of Massachusetts.
Commonwealth.
You think you know somebody. Anyway, but no.
Frank says that as a West Coaster, he stands by my opinion that we're too Eastern.
Definitely.
Ryan says too American, not enough foreigners except Claiborne.
Yeah, but I mean, people attack us as being very pro-Southern. I mean, look, I'm as northern blue as they come, but I can respect the facts that there were some, hard fighting, good generals on the other side.
Yep.
You don't need to be a PhD/TA to know that.
Yeah.
That's the way it is. But it's funny. It's so stupid sometimes.
I know. It's silly, some of the stuff that people will say to you over this and all that. And like the whole thing with Hiram Granberry is his wife does not, like, I can't even find a picture of her. Her name was Fanny, and I can't even find a picture of her. And she dies when she's 25 years old of ovarian cancer in 1863.
Yeah.
And then he, she went with him to the Civil War. Like when he went to fight, she was with him, a lot like John Brown Gordon's wife did. And she was sick a lot, but she still was with him. And it was
you kind of alluded to that a little bit with the fact that he was over at Fort Warren. You see it both ways. In my opinion, Fanny, she was definitely here.
I think she was,
but because there are accounts that when he got captured, and he got captured at Fort Donelson, she moved up here to be near him.
Yeah, and
so he wasn't. She didn't stay down in the South, so she was up here. And it was one of those visits to him in jail that the doctor he was in prison with. Yeah. They must have got a talking about the symptoms, and he diagnosed his ovarian cancer, which 1863 that's something. And that's what got her.
And then he did go back to fight. She was too sick to go, and he went back to fight, but then he came back and she passed away. And then apparently he was obviously pretty heartbroken by it, but he goes, he gets killed November 30th, 1864 at the Battle of Franklin. And he's, I think, 32.
Yeah.
Guys, he's one of the younger ones.
And to give my Bostonians credit, Mary, they paroled him when she realized, they said, okay, your wife's sick, you can go, you can leave.
Yeah. And I read one account, and this isn't true, the one account that said she couldn't go visit him because they weren't allowed to have people come visit them at Fort Warren. And I'm like, well, that's BS. I read that at the fort. Yeah. That they would she probably went and I'm in Boston nearly every day for work, and I wonder, did she see the common, you really get into the human side of the story with with these people, what
guarantee she went to Duncan's.
She probably bought Granberry Duncan's.
Go back to Starbucks, you fraud.
But when we were coming back on the boat from Fort Warren, we looked up and you can see the exchange house. What is
Customs
that?
House.
The Customs House. And I realized, holy shit, Hiram Granberry would have seen this.
Yeah, he would have. He would have.
That's really it's interesting when you're you realize wow, this is where they were. And Boston, there's pictures you can look at from the 1860s, and you can still tell that stuff is still there, right? But there's still a
lot of stuff. This city's obviously, like most cities, has changed quite a bit, but there are parts of the city that you can see the same thing that they would have seen back in the day, which is cool about the old Philly, Boston, New York. That's what's cool about the old cities.
But the whole thing with Hiram Granberry and his wife is that, he's Southern, he fought for the South, but that doesn't mean that story and her story doesn't get to be told, or that you need to put I know he's Southern. I'm so tired of having to no, you gotta preface it with I know he's Southern.
I mean, for people, this is the thing that I've said many times about the Civil War people, the smartest people, as far as I know. But that's the one thing that people need to get over. You need to be able to stop having to say what you just said. I know he's Southern, but right. Yeah. You should be able to be educated and studied enough to be able to sit there and say just whatever. And if I were to say that anybody on this list, okay, Patrick Cleburne was the best the Confederates had. I shouldn't have to sit there and say, because the people I'm talking to should know exactly what it doesn't mean that I'm a whatever, that I believe in every horrific thing that the Confederacy believed in. But again, what it does is it's people. I think, and we've said this a million times privately too, is you got to take off the modern politics hat. You got to.
You have to. Yeah. And people on here saying Alex said the political debate about being too Northern and too Southern is stupid. You just need to look at pros and flaws on both sides.
That's why if I was in the Civil War, I would have fought for the West. I'm with everybody.
All right, so Bob said, I find the hardcore Northern guys and the hardcore Southern guys just annoying. There's some really hardcores out there, and I'm getting like, it's so sad when you have to like, I know he's Southern, or I know this about them. I know, like, just talk about them. Everybody knows. We all know, like, and you shouldn't have to be judged for whoever you study or whoever.
No, because you have to look at the fact that there's good and bad in everybody.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to have Nathan Bedford Forrest, babysit my friends' kids anytime soon or anything like that. but that doesn't mean that I can't study him. Are you kidding me? That you must be a Confederate sympathizer because you're reading John Brown Gordon's diary.
Yeah,
that's the shit you deal with. And you know who this comes from? The Lincoln douchebags.
Oh, it does.
It does.
Oh, it does.
Right?
Yep. Because they don't like McClellan. That's another one.
All the shit that I've caught from all the years of studying John Wilkes Booth and the Lincoln assassination. Like I'm some sort of friggin' psychotic. Who maybe I am. Who the hell knows? But that's the thing is, I don't understand how you can truly understand and study a subject if you can't study every side of it.
Flat out refusal to study it or to make assumptions about the people. Is it Ryan said that things haven't changed since the Civil War in England. The UK Roundtable is still angrily divided at times between North and South. Frank said people are just hating on Granberry due to his rocking good hair. Hiram Granberry is the patron saint of every child who did not brush their hair.
As Taylor Swift would say, he had hella good hair.
Oh, he did. I'm jealous of his hair. David said too many people are still trying to refight the war through their keyboards.
There's a lot of that.
Oh God!
As I use my toy sword and go to battlefields.
Hell, like
I don't know. I just think the dynamic of peoples is so freaking stupid.
It is. But it's it's a minority of people. Luckily,
of course, it is.
It makes people it makes people. I've talked to people who are like, I'm afraid to say I like to study this person because I'm going to be judged. And me, I went to Atlanta, and then this is before I got off Twitter. I was afraid to post a picture of me with John Brown Gordon's grave because I thought I was going to get hate for it. And then I left Twitter, and I'm like, I don't care anymore. Like, I'm not there hero worshiping John Brown Gordon. I'm there seeing his grave because he was one of the most talented fighters in the Confederacy.
It's history.
He's a douchebag, but
it's history. I mean, there's death kind of should absolve a lot of people in some ways.
Yeah.
I mean, the people who sit there and say, I remember we went to where the hell did we went to Richmond and we went to see Jefferson Davis's grave over at Hollywood.
Yeah.
And someone messaged me, I hope you pissed on the grave.
Like,
I'm like, are you fucking kidding me?
No. Like,
I'm like, first, it's just show a little respect. You can appreciate history and you can learn from history without taking everything so goddamn personally all the time. And that's the thing.
I got hate over when I posted the Booth grave from all these Lincoln people. And I just went and unfriended a lot of them on Facebook. I'm like, if you're going to treat me that way, like some person was like, I'd let my dog pee on his grave. It's like, no, that's not like.
I remember who that was.
Oh yeah. So do I. Yep. So, and then Glowjam says, I'm a true blue North, but have deep empathy for everyday grunt Southern soldiers that was forced to leave his family and herded into battle like cattle. And MJ makes a good point. She said, these folks are scared that they will find something on the other side that they can relate to in themselves. And that's exactly it.
People can relate to everybody.
These people aren't all evil.
No, I mean, it's that's what we've said. We were talking about the Battle of Cold Harbor. It's we were talking about the draft riots, about the rich man's war, poor man's fight. And hate to tell you, there was some negative racist shit in the North too.
Yeah, there was. That's the thing is, like, some of these really hardcore Northerners, they don't talk about the racism that was happening. They don't talk about the fact that William Tecumseh Sherman for his entire life was just as racist as a lot of the Confederates.
Oh yeah, but you mentioned Gordon. Gordon. You want a real fascinating study. Look at Gordon. Yeah. This is a guy. He wasn't a West Pointer, okay, and a lot of the best generals weren't. And I think because they didn't have that Clausewitz, Jomini thing in the back of
Yeah,
their
that
heads.
was
right?
Beauregard's problem,
So-
is he was so textbook and he couldn't get his
Right.
head out of the textbook.
And so you got a guy like Gordon, he's in charge of the 6th Alabama, the Raccoon Roughs was what they call them. And he has his first great moment at Seven Pines, speaking of Howard with the arm and all that stuff, and Johnston, right? And he's right up front, and people are getting killed and shot, and he stays right up front. We joke like the Fabio thing with the horse. And he kind of, and he really, MJ's on, I hate to say this, but he kind of pantsed Hancock over there at Spotsylvania.
Yeah.
Well, Reams was later, but
that's right too.
But Gordon, for the most part, up until Fort Stedman, never lost a battle.
No.
And even Stedman wasn't his. I'm not going to be an apologist for Gordon, but just calling it balls and strikes here. It wasn't really his fault that thing fell apart, because the whole thing was a shit show at that point. But he really, he was like the Forrest Gump of the Confederacy. Everything he did was successful. He was a good, hard fighting soldier. Yes, he had a lot of hardcore, elements about him. The Klan stuff came out later with that. But after the war, he ends up being one of the more influential politicians in Georgia. He's part of that Bourbon triumvirate, and he helps really develop the railroad system in Georgia and parts of Florida that are still influential today. That's why he got a statue.
In Florida. He dies in Florida.
That's why there's a statue of him in Atlanta,
which you can't get to.
Right. Because they put behind a fence, but it's not so much just because of what he did in the Civil War. It's what he did afterwards. He was a very influential politician, and people don't always like to study the politics. If you study post-war Gordon, post-war Longstreet, it's not as exciting because there's no battles. It's a lot of shit. But read a lot on Gordon. If you look at someone to read, just an overall very influential person. He's just successful. He survives the war, and by all accounts, he had no business surviving the war. He shouldn't have. Well,
didn't you say he cashed in his karma?
Yeah. He gets shot in the face at the rail in Antietam, and his body ends up being like a piñata at that point. Every battle he goes to, he gets hurt from that point on. But he's at Seven Pines with that 6th Alabama. And he's right up front, and the bullets are whizzing by him. He must have thought he was Superman. And that was kind of what set him off. But he was great. No one studies him at Spotsylvania. No. You look at you.
They kind of stop it. It's like anything. It's like, because he's at Gettysburg, it stops there.
You look at Barlow a lot with Spotsylvania, as you should. But people don't study a lot of Hancock there. But you study a lot of guys like Allegheny Johnson with his cane, old clubby, swinging the clubs at the mule shoe there. But you don't study a lot of Gordon. And Gordon was when that second wave came that really saved Lee's ass. That was the closest Lee came to being caught. He was on the edge at that point, and Gordon was a big part of saving his ass. And that's why he's fascinating to study. He's just one of those guys.
Oh yeah, David said little Matt got double savannah by Lincoln and Stanton.
Yeah, he did. He certainly did.
AQ said Gordon was a first-rate badass. MJ said Gordon's a badass. David said Gordon's an incredible soldier. And Lynn said the same thing. Completely agree. And then CD said, sadly, you read the room correctly. Nuance is a rarity and non-existent on X, what used to be Twitter. It's easier to brand people to marginalize their opinions in fields. That's true. It's a minority. And
there I can think of 5 people at the top of my head who are just sleaze in the Civil War history world on Twitter. Yeah. And they no just
respect for anybody.
And some of these people have some pretty dark fucking skeletons in their fucking closet. So maybe they should not run their goddamn mouths. But just saying. Oh yeah. Just saying, Mary. I'm just saying.
AQ said, isn't there a story that goes around that Gordon saved my poor Barlow?
And that's a famous story. And I know she put this on her Facebook today. I thought maybe she did. I thought, maybe I'm dreaming. I thought she did. But there's that famous story where she, and that's debated. And there are a lot of stories that come out after the Civil War. Yeah. And, the one story that's not debated is that dinner they had. And they realized who each other was. And, but again, that's could be urban myth. It could be anything.
We never know. Addressing Gettysburg is on here, by the way. He said hello.
Hey, I saw Matt last weekend. I popped in.
Talk to her.
that was a good, those are good deals that he
They
does.
are.
If you guys don't follow Justin Gettysburg, I'm sure you do, but go on there and make sure that you go on these tours.
Yeah. I
Because
think
they're
there's
just,
2 more left this year. There's one in September, and I think there's one in October.
because they're a lot of fun. It's always it's good to support him and support Ronnie and support Mike, and because they're good people. It definitely support them. But those tours they do are awesome. And it was funny. And this is me being a bad person. I didn't even know that I was there last week, and I didn't know what was going on. I was sitting at a bar, shockingly, on Friday afternoon, and someone came up to me and says, "Hey, Darren, are you in town for Matt's tour?" And I said, "I did." Which the guy, he goes, "Yeah, it's tomorrow." I said, I'm glad he told me, because I wasn't aware what was going on. There's been so much shit going on in my life, I wasn't paying attention to it. So I'm glad I did. So we were over at Pitzer's Woods. We got to do the bird and sharpshooters against the right over there in the when Sickles moved those troops up, the 3rd Maine guys. Which is a great, fascinating study, because sometimes people will go to Gettysburg and they'll be surprised to see Union monuments on the Confederate side.
Yeah.
And you got to explain the whole reconnaissance with the sharpshooters in the 3rd Maine and all those guys. It's pretty cool.
There's so much to see at Gettysburg besides Little Round Top.
No, and you started to get like Moses Lakeman and the other people of we mentioned before about how much Rhode Island was, but how much Maine had.
Yeah.
And when we have Tom Huntington on here pretty soon to talk about his book Gettysburg, Gettysburg. You talk about that reconnaissance, which is really good. But no, it's definitely worthwhile. I was surprised not to see Gentili, because he goes to all those things.
He said he was thinking about it, but he never showed up to it. He's at some cabin.
They must have had a height requirement that day.
Poor John.
No, but definitely good. Definitely check that out. That's a lot of good stuff they do.
Yeah.
Those tours are great,
Yeah, but I know Hessler and Lindblade from Battle of Gettysburg podcast, another podcast that we enjoy, and we've hung out with them before. They're great people. They do like their licensed battlefield guides, but they sometimes do like tours outside of Gettysburg as well. Like I know Jim talks a lot about Custer and all that, and they've done stuff I think at Winchester maybe, or Monocacy. Yeah, anyway, they get out of the Burg and do tours outside of that as well. AQ said that it was an 1879 dinner in Washington, D.C. with Barlow and Gordon. It was
Clarkson Potter dinner.
Yeah.
And that was that's a cool little story. But there's a lot of stories like that. I mean, me personally, I think that I think Gordon was probably aware of Barlow. I don't know if he came up to him and that story is exactly how it sounds, because it sounds very Hollywood. But it's very similar to the Bingham story with Armistead either.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as I love my Masonic monument over there in the cemetery, it didn't really work out the way people think it did. I mean, it's
the one story I like is Gordon and Lew Wallace at dinner.
Yeah.
Post-Civil War, and Lew Wallace was like, well, "You kicked my ass," and Gordon's like, "Are you kidding? You stopped us from getting Washington."
Yeah, no, it was funny. We were speaking of bars, me and a couple of friends of mine last week, and found ourselves in Frederick, Maryland. And my friend Mike kept saying, I saw a Civil War sign for a bag. He was talking about Monocacy, but he couldn't pronounce Monocacy. He couldn't say it. But I had to tell him the whole story about that. And he's like, "How do I not know about this battle?" I'm like, "Because no one studies it.
Nobody studies Monocacy, yet it's such an important battle." And
he's like, "There's a battle that literally held Washington." And I mean, not to overstate it, but Jubal Early was that close to attacking Washington, and Lew Wallace, the guy who wrote Ben-Hur, helped slow him down to help the Sixth Corps get back. And he's like, "How the hell do they never teach? You should learn it."
Yeah, and it's an amazing battlefield. Our friend Matt Borders is a ranger there.
He is.
We've seen him. He gave a talk that one day.
We stood in the back and we listened to his tour.
It was really good. Yeah, he knows his stuff about Monocacy. But yeah, studying Monocacy, that's actually one of my favorite episodes that we recorded. I studied it, and then we went to visit, and I finally understood when we walked the cornfield down to the Monocacy River, where I nearly fell in. That would have been a good time.
Oh God, watching your ass roll down that hill. That honestly, there was not many greater moments in my life to watch you. That was a good day. That was. I'm gonna bottle that in memory for a while.
Oh God, MJ said Monocacy has great hoodies. They do.
They do have great hoodies. If you're gonna go, get a hoodie. It's the best hoodies in the world. But that's a good group. That's a good group when you go over there and see them. But Monocacy's neat because you can. It's one of the. eastern battlefields in that area that's really untouched. You can sit there at the Worthington farm and you can see pretty much exactly what Early had seen
You can
or
see what
any of these
Gordon
guys have
saw
seen.
as well.
Right. Because you can see because it's pristine for the most
Yeah.
part. It's very similar to parts of Antietam, parts of Gettysburg. Gettysburg has got I don't want to say too many monuments, but there's not many places you can go and look and not see monuments.
Mhm.
That's why I like the area behind the 20th Indiana.
Yeah.
That cauldron, speaking of the 3rd Arkansas, where Van Manning's guys came up.
Yeah.
Because you can walk, you go behind the monument and you can walk down there and there's no monuments, there's no trails. You can kind of literally see what those Arkansas, how do you say that? Arkansans, okay.
Arkansans,
What those
okay.
guys would have seen coming up the hill. Because if you read some of Van Manning's after action report, he talks about the men coming up this hill, shooting, falling back and reloading, and you can still see it. It's exactly the same. And that's what's cool about places like Gettysburg, but places like Monocacy, the whole place is like that. There's very few monuments in Monocacy.
It's same with Chickamauga. We were talking this morning while we were having coffee that we got to get back to Chickamauga because it rained when we were there and you couldn't get to spots like where Hood was wounded and all that. We did get to go down to Alexander's Bridge though, which was amazing to see that where John T. Wilder was. But Chickamauga is one of those battlefields that's very pristine, very much I've heard it called a soldier's battlefield because the soldiers literally, I mean, and they helped out with Gettysburg too, but they were the one, like, they go there, they place the monuments, they tell the story. Every year at Chickamauga on the anniversary, there's this group of reenactors that go and they have like a shot of whiskey for Helm, who was killed there, Abraham Lincoln's brother-in-law.
Yeah, we saw where he was shot.
Yeah.
Of course, we couldn't get to it because it was floating underwater.
Well, so it's Hood's.
Yeah, the day we were there last April, it had been raining and raining and raining.
We were supposed to meet up with Jim as well, and then the weather ruined that, so we didn't get to see Jim. And
we hung out with Ed Lowe though. That was cool.
We did. That was cool. He and his wife were so nice.
And but it was like all the monuments are in the woods, and they were all like literally 6 inches in water. It was tough,
I know, and I wanted to take you down to so we were up in Snodgrass Hill, and I wanted to take you down to where Jessica and I found this North Carolina monument when she and I went there like 3 or 4 years ago. Or no, it was almost 5 years that Jessica and I went there. Anyway, she and I found this North Carolina monument, and then I ran into poison ivy, which was awesome. Nothing happened though. Nearly tripped over some tree roots. But even going to those places, say whether it's Monocacy or Chickamauga, if you kind of go off the beaten path, you can see more of what they saw and what they went through. It's just I realized exploring Snodgrass Hill that one time with Jessica, I realized, wow, we're down where Longstreet was throwing up all the assaults at Thomas. And to imagine those guys, that train's not changed much, to imagine those guys running up the hill in the dark, and having to avoid all these tree roots and everything else. It's just it makes you appreciate more of what happened there. It's really fascinating. Bill Etzcorn says Appomattox and Monocacy have the same hoodies, by far the best ones.
No, it's just the way they're made. They're nice hoodies. They're pretty reasonable price too.
AQ says, I've said before, Monocacy was one of the most important battles of the war and really is the true high watermark of the war. Ryan says that Cedar Mountain crazy? It's in the top 5 battlefields with the most monuments.
Yeah, you got a lot jammed in there too. Gettysburg has the most outdoor statuary of any place in the world. When you look at the 6,000 acres and how many monuments they have, admittedly, this is mostly north. There's only 31 Confederate monuments at Gettysburg, but there's a ton. And I remember one of the first times I ever went to Gettysburg, I was on a little round top. It was nighttime, so it was after hours. Don't tell anybody. And we were out there, and the moon we were standing up by the Warren statue, and the moon was behind us, and it was the moonlight. It was a full moon, was glittering all the monuments, all through the woods down there, all the slaughter pen, all through Hawks Creek, all that stuff. So it looked like campfires. It was really cool to it was one of those moments just hit just right. Yeah. But there are a lot of monuments at Gettysburg. Oh yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, that's cool. There's actually a lot at Chickamauga too. When you go off the beaten path and explore, one place I would never go at night at Chickamauga is, why would I be on a battlefield at night anyway? But I would never go out to Bragg's headquarters at night.
Yeah, Braggs
That is a
headquarters definitely has a
creepy
negative
freaking place.
vibe to it. I mean, even we went out there in the daytime. It's just the way it is. Maybe it's because it was Bragg, but
It's
it's
negative
kind of,
energy.
it just has a dark negative feel to it. And that's,
And did you notice our cell phones didn't work out there?
well, that's in the middle of
Yeah.
freaking nowhere. I mean, I'm not surprised, but but
Um,
Monocacy, it's one of those places. And, for a lot of the folks who go to Gettysburg more than they probably should, like me and you for that matter, is it's only about 45 minutes away. And there's some good restaurants, good breweries in Fredericksburg.
yeah.
It's a real pretty little town, but the battlefield is it's a really cool one. And like my friend Mike, he was was in the Navy. He's a history guy. He never heard of it, and was sitting there explaining all the nuances to Monocacy, the whole deal. And it was like he was an aliens had landed and just told this thing he couldn't believe, because it's such an influential battle. Not to overstate it, I mean, but what it did do is it did buy Grant time.
Yeah.
And the last thing Grant wanted to do, because don't forget, we've been doing a lot of Overland campaigns last month or
He's
so.
been like musical chairing the
Right. He has to pull heavy artillery. Right? Got 2nd Connecticut, 8th New York. He's going to pull them from Washington and Baltimore to fill the roles of the men who've been killed at Spotsylvania, at Cold Harbor, and North Anna. So he has to fill the roles. And so this last thing he wants to do, the last thing is to send what was probably his best corps at the time, the 6th Corps, up north to fight and defend Washington. And that's where Fort Stevens is. And speaking of battlefields that aren't kept, Fort Stevens is tragic. If you go up there, it's right in Silver Spring, Maryland.
Yep.
It's basically beer can hill. It's just a big field with beer cans everywhere. It's really too bad. But when you look, there was a map. If you guys, there's a Facebook page called Union Forts of Washington or something like that, what it's called. And they put a picture up yesterday that showed all the forts that surrounded Washington at the Civil War. And it's amazing. I mean, they say it was the most fortified city, and that's true. But when you see them all, the only soft spot was in the north where Stevens was. So you can see why they attacked there.
Yeah.
But it obviously didn't work out. But they bought just enough time. Now, if they got into Washington, they would have burned some buildings and caused some havoc, but they would have got pushed out pretty quick. But the politics of it, right around the war, I mean, right around the election, would have been bad.
Yeah, you don't realize and I mean, Sherman talks himself up about, he's like, I'm the reason that Lincoln won the election because I took Atlanta. It's like, dude, if Early had got in there even for a few hours, Atlanta might not have mattered. Because what that would have done for morale, and Early knew that. So did Gordon.
No, but you see what John McCausland did to Chambersburg.
Yeah,
they would have burned Washington. They would have burnt the White House. They would have burnt the Cap. They would have. There's no question they would have. Would have been just you Canadians and British.
That.
Yeah, the Truman balcony would have a little more burns on it, But that's how important that was. And there are people here. Who study the Civil War have a real weird hate for Lew Wallace, and I don't quite get it.
I don't get the Lew Wallace hate, because he doesn't. When you study Shiloh, and this is one thing we've realized studying Shiloh, is that Lew Wallace. I mean, this is just my opinion. He's a scapegoat. He's a scapegoat for Grant, because the one that should have taken the blame was Sherman. Sherman effed up. He learned.
No, Shiloh is a bad thing, but again. No, I would put Grant in that too, though, because Grant, he's the one who didn't send, he basically sent, a random staffer to go find Wallace. And of course, the whole they all get lost and the whole thing screws up, and so that's why he disappears. He gets there late. When Buell shows up, that's really what saved the whole day. But that's more of the Confederates probably. A combination of weather by being delayed and the fact that they ran out of time. It's like, if you look at the second day at Gettysburg, for example, they were one brigade short of that echelon attack, one brigade short. They ran out of gas. If you believe Ambrose Wright and his Georgians, they got to the angle. Lane's Floridians were gone. Posey was disappeared. But they says he got there. That echelon attack finally broke. They were one brigade short of breaking through. If you believe that, that's what happened with Shiloh too. Mm-hmm. And they didn't have enough guys. And then once the Union got the Army of the Ohio, and that was the end of the day. But they were that close.
I know.
Push him in that Pittsburgh Landing, that close.
Yeah, Shiloh is a really fascinating study. We got to go back and redo our episode in Shiloh because the recording isn't the greatest. That's one of our episodes we need to do a
yeah, we could probably do that one over again. But I mean, if you look at the whole picture, I mean, Wallace, my issue with Lew Wallace was, he was one of the justices on the conspiracy.
Yeah.
And it was mostly he was
literally sitting there doodling the entire time.
No,
like
David
Ron.
Hunter, August Couts, Albion Howe, James Eakin, David Clenenden, him, Robert Foster, Tim Harrison, C.M. Tompkins. Those are the justices for the Lincoln assassination.
Mm-hmm.
And he was one of the ones who wanted no part of the pardon afterwards.
Yeah.
And he sat there, like you said, he sat there doing drawings, right, the whole time.
Yeah.
But my issue, and people have an issue with him with Billy the Kid, apparently, and that's whatever.
Yeah, that's what MJ mentioned too. Like there is, and the thing is Lew Wallace is one of these people that you have your opinion about him. There's good about him and there's bad about him. I really have a lot of respect for him because of, just how he took the stuff after Shiloh, and he gets called back from the bullpen basically, and he gets his retribution. And what he does at Monocacy is, Gordon even says it, you stopped us, like you slowed us down.
Yeah.
And to me, that was the one where I thought, like, okay, if we go back and talk to any of these generals, what battle would they say was the one that had the most impact on them personally, or that they thought had the most impact on the war? And I think we might find, if we spoke to somebody like John Brown Gordon, he might not say Gettysburg. He might say Monocacy because it totally slowed them down. He might say,
well, Monocacy was probably for him the white whale that got away, right? Because I think let's be honest, if Gordon and Early could have got into DC, they would have been heroes in the South. And I think they were that close to Confederate immortality. Even if they got pushed out, it was so close, but yet so far. But again, they screwed up too. I mean, they were slow as shit. They had glacier-like speed going from Frederick to Washington.
Well, that's because they got stopped at, where was that? What's his face's house, and they got all drunk.
Preston Blair's house. They got loaded. They got a bunch of money and they used it to buy ice cream and sat around. Seriously, they did. They robbed. They ransomed the town for the bank. They passed out money. And they literally all got in line for ice cream and stood there. And it was 24 hours. They finally got moving.
Yeah. And
then they all got banged up at old Preston Blair's house, right? Actually, it was Francis Blair. It wasn't Preston
Francis Blair's house.
Yeah. And so their fingerprints are all over it too. Yeah. But when they got there and they found out, oh shit, the 6th Corps is here, because they thought they was going to push right through. Because if you remember, if you studied the Battle of Monocacy, the city of Washington was defended by volunteers, bankers, and merchants who were just being taught how to fire a gun. Left, right, put your finger on the line.
So it's kind of like how it was in the March to the Sea, right? Like at that point in Georgia, there's that one battle, Griswold Bill, which I found out there's a book. It's like a shorter novel about Griswold Bill. It's written by, he's an author. I follow him on Instagram, Jordan Poss. And he wrote a book about Griswold Bill, about just the story of it. But that's a sad one too. But at that point, there's nobody left in Georgia.
It's similar because you think about the fact of how much time and effort Lincoln spent to defend Washington. And at the crucial moment for the election, he gets caught with his pants down, with his rail splitter sticking out, and how close it came.
An image I don't need. Miranda doesn't need that image either.
That's probably true, especially. But that's the truth.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, because that's what's ironic about it. When you think about the fact the Peninsula Campaign fell apart, because he sends McDowell out to chase Jackson because he's afraid of Washington falling. He was so protective of everything he did was make sure the capital's defended, And at that very moment, it's undefended.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show, and again, how important Monocacy actually is. Yeah. Because it was like Connecticut traffic. It slowed you down just enough to screw up your time to get to Pennsylvania. And that's what happened. Wallace had no chance to win that battle, none. But he got there early. He recognized the high ground. he was able to slow them down 48 hours. 48. I mean, if you've been to Frederick, it's pissing distance from Washington. It's so close.
Yeah.
And he could have went right through there into Washington against a pretty much undefended city.
Yeah. And you think about it too. He's kind of like, in a way, Jubal Early going to Antietam on his little spite march. You got to think that Wallace also has a lot of spite towards Grant. And there's some of that factoring into just how hard he fought there. Like, I'm going to show this guy that threw me under the bus for no good reason. And I'm going to show him that I can do this. Frank mentions, this is a good point. We keep saying fascinating study, but I can't think of a battle event that is not fascinating. Every event and person in the war has its merits. That's true. Like, and the more you study it, the more stuff you find. AQ, Connecticut is the biggest sucker with the Gettysburg.
Oh, it is. I go back and forth between Connecticut and Ohio for my favorite state in the United States. I don't know. Connecticut, it's just something. It's a pretty state and all that. I have a lot of friends who live in Connecticut, but that 95 getting through dry, it just sucks. It just sucks. Ohio's the worst.
I hate Ohio. Yeah. Other than Cedar Point and the Cleveland Indians. I mean, Cedar Point's cool. Cleveland Indians. We're not going to make the playoffs, but God, I want us to bring down the Jays so bad, so they don't make the playoffs. I feel bad saying that because my mom was the biggest Blue Jays fan, but I don't like the Jays.
I know, but that's
fascinating study. I mean, there's so much that is fascinating that we've discovered. At least I have. I'm sure you too, in doing this podcast and to just talking to everybody on here when we do these lives. Like, I learned so much from people. Like, I mean, Frank is like, he's really into Claiborne like I am. And we've had some great, like, Frank knows his stuff too, which is awesome. And the one fascinating battle that I find, that especially after I got to visit it, was Ringgold Gap. That when you can go to Ringgold Gap and you can see what Claiborne was doing, and you realize, you go to Ringgold Gap, but you also go to what's that one where Howard got his ass kicked? Not Chancellorsville, but in the Western Theater. We did the
Pickett's Mill.
Yeah, Pickett's Mill. You see how good Claiborne was, but you also see he was good because he had amazing.
You just got to clarify where Howard got his ass kicked. This is a handful.
I know. Anyway, but you realize how good Claiborne was at these, and they're smaller battles, but they do factor into the bigger picture. But it really, going on that trip to Atlanta and seeing Ringgold Gap and all that, it made me realize that Claiborne was good too, because he had amazing subordinates like Hiram Granberry and his Texans. He had Lucius Polk, and he had, and his name's Banbury. You want to see something funny at Ringgold Gap? Go look at the stones leading up to, they've got Claiborne's flag on display for his division. So the one that's in this picture.
It's fascinating because it's you're in Ringgold, Georgia, which is capital Confederacy with a capital C. Everything there. It's just very, very. They have in Ringgold Gap. There's a train station, which is the target of the attack.
That's where Hooker had his headquarters.
Right. And so, and with the 137th New York fought in that area with Ireland, all those guys. Mm-hmm. But there's a monument, and it lists all the Confederate generals, and they would say Daniel Govan, Hiram Banbury, and it's written in concrete. Someone chiseled it, and it'd be
it's just Muppet names. If they were Muppets, that's what they were.
Yeah, but you think that someone didn't proofread? I mean, and someone, we can't be the only ones who've ever noticed it. They must have screw it. Whatever, no one cares.
Like I saw that Banbury.
Do you know, by the way, that's where Dolly Parton got married?
Yes,
was Ringgold Gap, Georgia, married.
That's cool. It is a cool little place.
It is.
And that's also where that Georgia winery is, where we had
that was a good
peach wine.
Peach wine.
If you find yourself in Ringgold Gap, Georgia, go to the Georgia winery. You will not be disappointed.
If you find yourself in Ringgold Gap, Georgia, that's many things, because you gotta want it. You gotta want it.
It was cool to see it, though.
No, I like it's cool. It is.
And also because David Ireland was there, and he's probably one of the best in the Union Army at that point. He's going up against the best the Confederacy has. Oh,
David Ireland was Chuck Norris of the Union at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why it's a shame that illness got him.
Yeah.
Because this is a guy who he's literally, they're marching forward to Ringgold Gap, and they're leaning in to the fire because it's like hail, and they keep going.
Yeah.
And when you see how close they got to Ringgold, I mean, and he fought at Wauhatchie. I mean, everyone knows him from Gettysburg, but Gettysburg was their first battle, and that's how strong they were. And,
Yeah.
But he's a guy who, if he survived the war, he would have been a much more of a household name. But
Oh yeah.
David Ireland, I mean, he's someone who, it's really fascinating, and that's how we went to Binghamton to go to his grave site.
And that cemetery is like, if
and
you find yourself in Binghamton.
Yeah, he's buried about 100 yards from John Cleveland Robinson, the Gettysburg people from the first day, second division, the first corps at Oak Ridge and all that. But the cemetery. It's sad because it's just overrun with weeds and grass. The stones are all there's trees down. It's a nice area. If you go up there, you can go see that. But he was somebody who was a legit baller. I mean, he just was.
Yeah.
He just was.
And he was going up against the best the Confederacy had, in my opinion, is Patrick Cleburne. He's, like, if he'd survived the war, he's another one that, what would
they're very similar. Like, they're very similar people in Cleburne in Ireland. When you look at their personalities and how they were, they have a lot of that same DNA. Whatever that we said before, like Winfield Scott Hancock has that X factor. Stonewall Jackson had that X. It was whatever the hell it was. They both had it. They really did. And because they both died before the war ended, and they didn't have a chance to write memoirs, and their stories were never really truly told. Tim Simons did a good job at his book, but there's been nothing about Ireland.
No.
Maybe this guy's going to write a book on Ireland someday.
I'm going to write my Howard biography.
Ireland was a big Red Sox fan too.
Really?
That's gonna be in the book. Who the hell knows? But no, seriously,
then who did Patrick Cleburne cheer for?
I don't know.
Probably
who the hell knows? Oh, for God's sakes. Well, it wouldn't have been anybody from Ohio, because he couldn't get a job in Ohio. Couldn't get into school in Ohio. He's probably had a hate on for Ohio. He probably would have been a big Michigan Wolverine fan, probably.
I could see him wearing Michigan hoodie.
No, but these are the guys, when you study these battles and you study these stories, the ones that kind of get lost, that get thrown out with the bathwater,
Yeah, like the Ringgold Gaps, the Pickett's Mill, and too, like, you realize, like, when you go to Pickett's Mill and then you see if you've seen it in Ringgold Gap, you realize that what Cleburne did at Pickett's Mill, he just repeated that, except it was 100 times more at Ringgold Gap. He had the troops positioned the same way. He hid the artillery. And he was able
but Cleburne also had the benefit of having really good ground, though.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you've seen Ringgold. I mean, it's you're going to go through those gaps, through those mountains. You're going to have an impossible time getting through there. And then Pickett's Mill. I mean, there's no one's getting past that.
That is like that is, had I been Thomas and I received that message from Howard where it said the end of it was I think, I would be like, this guy's not sure. Like, if you put I think at the end of something, you're not 100% sure. And Howard was not 100% sure at Pickett's Mill.
Oh, Andrew, have a good day.
Have a good day, too.
That's Miranda. Muckfish again. Oh my goodness, blasphemy. Michigan's football is going to be good this year. They're going to beat the living piss out of Ohio State.
I got my Michigan shirt. I'm ready to wear it.
Yeah, I'll tell you about that. I'm gonna have to get a blue Wallace Michigan jersey just for Miranda, or Sheridan.
Every time we see a Sheridan drive, I think of Miranda and I, and the hate we have for Phil.
There's a Sheridan drive around the corner here.
I know. We would buy it yesterday. I'm like, there's Sheridan drive.
No, it's pretty, but for real though, the Ireland study is a good one, because it really shows, and it's very similar history to John Brown Gordon as far as rising to the ranks, though. You kind of thrust into it and you make the best of it. And there's a lot, we'd say this before, there's a lot to this about avoiding that West Point stigma. And because you're not, you don't have to be unlearn something to learn something. What these guys did for the most part is they learned on the fly. They learned based on instinct. They knew what worked, what didn't work. They weren't stuck behind. I mean, you look at George Sayers Green, right? Yeah. How John Geary at Gettysburg is telling him to don't waste your time building the fortifications, because it gives soldiers an some sort of fake, feeling of security. And he's like, fuck that. He goes, he said, a soldier's life is worth more than some antiquated theory. And he was right about that.
Yep.
Maryland Stewart would have rolled right over those five regiments if it wasn't for the, and anybody who's been to Culp Hill, you see the breastworks, the land.
Yep.
But you learn this
not
stuff.
As good as the ones at Kennesaw.
Oh, Kennesaw is pretty legit. They are,
That is hardcore. That's 3 layers deep. Any Union soldier that got to the third one was badass.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. No, I got you. I do. But when you see the what people learn on the fly, versus the theories, because the theory got thrown out the window. You saw how it went from Napoleonic style to trench warfare pretty quickly. And they had to learn, and it was the subordinates who learned quicker.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah. Well, you look at Pat Claiborne after Shiloh, and he realizes that had he had sharpshooters, he might have been able to take out more of the Union artillery by targeting the men and the horses specifically. So what does he do? He goes for, he trains a lot of his men to be sharpshooters in the downtime, because he recognized, if I can take out the artillery, that's going to be huge. So Claiborne is one of these guys that just he kept learning and learning and learning. And again, I am more on, I do agree with you more about that, that there was the ceiling there for him because he was Irish. There is one story, I think Simmons writes about it, that he tries to hide his accent.
Yeah. Just
so he doesn't sound, but then apparently when he got really fired up, it came out.
That's the truth with that. And it's unfortunate. And we've said this a million times. If he'd have got into the pharmacy school in Ohio, and he would have stayed up, and he would have fought for Ohio, and he would have been up there with Grant and Sherman. Yeah. He still would have hit that glass ceiling though, because the hate for the Irish is just as strong here as it was in the South. But he would have been a baller, and he would have been someone who, it's tough to say, he might have been killed on day one. Who the hell knows? But how life is. But he would have been
respected on both sides, though.
Right, but he would have been somebody who would have been he could have been another Sherman for Grant.
Yep.
I don't know what that would have meant for George Thomas. Thomas might have been stuck.
I think Thomas would have I know Howard mentions Claiborne a couple times in his memoirs and just refers to him as a formidable foe, that he knew at Missionary Ridge who they were going up against.
Yeah, I wonder though, because of the distrust that Grant and Sherman have for Thomas, if maybe Thomas doesn't even get a chance if Sherman stays in the North. You never know.
If Claiborne stayed, I think Claiborne. Claiborne would have been Western Theater, because I just go by the fact that Lytle was also from Cincinnati and he fought Western Theater, so that would have been. Interesting.
You never know.
And I do wonder too, when Sherman went when he had his little breakdown. If Claiborne would have moved up into his role and stayed there, and how does that kind of play out?
I don't know. Maybe
that's the thing is
maybe he would have commanded would have been on Steinwehr, would have been with George Nixon. Maybe would have been with the 55th Ohio or 73rd Ohio, and you never know.
That's the interesting thing too. If Claiborne does fight for the North, you're right. Thomas might not have moved up.
That's the fun little things we can talk about. You never know. Yeah.
But and Miranda said Claiborne would have been a Notre Dame fan, and I'm just don't trash him.
There's no such thing as a real Notre Dame fan. Notre Dame fans are frauds. Trust me.
MJ, he would be an Army fan.
I don't know. Notre Dame, for Christ's sake. Speaking of last century, I fucking hate them. But it isn't far to think though that he obviously would have fought for the Union. Claiborne, there's no question he would have. He would have fought for his home state. His home state ultimately ended up being Arkansas, because that's where he
accepted there, and he found home, and that's the thing. And this goes back to this human element that you find yourself relating to, whether it's North or South. You relate to these people if you study them. And the way I relate to Claiborne is that he's an immigrant. He never felt at home in Ireland, and he finally felt at home in Arkansas. And I relate to that as well, feeling at home here in the US. And yes, I'm Canadian and all that. And, it's always going to be my home country, but that's how I relate to him. I get that feeling, but he joins the Masons, just like Hiram Granberry. And they were really good friends.
I don't know who you're talking about.
Okay, but Hiram Granberry and Claiborne were really good friends before the war, right?
I don't know if they were really good. I mean, it was Thomas Hinman and Claiborne
Hinman,
with
wasn't
they
Hinman a
they
party
were
boy?
he got Claiborne shot that time. So after a
I think
bar,
Claiborne had issues with his lungs for the rest of his life.
yeah, Hinman was running his mouth after a night of drinking, and they
Shocker.
ended up running his mouth at somebody. And Thomas Hinman was who he was, and he ends up Claiborne gets in the middle of something. He gets shot. And Hinman was kind of yeah, he was a wild child. He was kind of like a rogue, like a loose cannon. He just was. He always was.
Was he the one that Claiborne almost killed when he got drunk? When Claiborne got drunk that one time,
he was one when Claiborne lost his friggin' mind.
And then Claiborne's like, "I'm not drinking anymore. I get too angry."
Oh, Hinman was that friend you have who goes out and you go, God, just please don't cause an issue with the bar tonight. That's who Thomas Hinman was. But he fought hard though. I mean, he was with him over there in Chickamauga and all that stuff. I mean,
the other friendship with Claiborne is Hardy. Hardy's like what's his face in the pimp suit.
Hardy was more like a mentor though. I mean, their relationship, Hardy and Claiborne was he liked to get his swerve on. I mean, he did. He was looking for love in all the wrong places. That's what he was.
With women at best.
And Claiborne was kind of the awkward guy. I mean, this wasn't a Heath Hancock thing. This was more Hancock, Claiborne's along for the ride, and Hardy was also the boss too. Yeah. But I think he looked at Hardy as kind of like a mentor. It was a mentor protege relationship more than anything. But they did have their social events. They did their social moments.
Well, there was that wedding that happened at Stones River, and Claiborne is like, "Nah, I'm going to pass." He just tent for the night and didn't go to it. And then Hardy was finally like, "You're going to be the best man at my wedding." And so Claiborne had to, and that's where he met Sue Tarleton, his fiance.
Yeah.
And she died soon after the war too, unfortunately. But like apparently that completely changed him. He used to be this like grumpy, wasn't he really grumpy before he met her? And then like his men started saying like, "Wow, he's in a really good mood."
Oh, he got love struck is what he was.
Oh, big time. He also, Frank Claiborne was a ride or die with his homies, Hinman, Mangum, Hardy, Lucius Polk, Granberry, Coven.
That must have been quite those meetings when you think about it, especially when you look at Pickett's Mill or you look at those things, how they were. That's quite a group they had with Polk and Granberry.
Yeah,
how that must have been.
I want to study the subordinates more, like Granberry and Polk specifically, just because I think they helped to make Claiborne what he was. They were some kind of, it's kind of like that you hear about it. There's this relationship between Lee and Stonewall, which I think is overrated at times.
Well, that's the Virginia thing. I mean, the thing about Stonewall Jackson is that the way he died. He was, but
he's not Claiborne.
He's got that Kurt Cobain thing where he died young, and there was a lot of potential, and the cult of personality grew from that. And Jackson did a lot of great things, but he had the 7 days, which he sucked.
Got stuck in a tree.
He had his negative moments too, but he obviously had Chancellorsville. He obviously had First Manassas. So he was a rising star, but he had his moments. But death helped him. It just as far as personality goes. Yeah. Same thing happened with Jeb Stewart.
Yeah.
With Yellow Tavern. But as time goes on with some of these guys, the ones who get clipped early, we talked a million times about Albert Sidney Johnson.
Yeah.
And we have no idea what he was going to be. No idea. But when you see the dumpster fire biohazard that the Army of Tennessee rolls out after him, I mean, it's easy to sit there and say, well, he's going to be better. I still think that Joseph E. Johnson, I think he would have been the guy, or Beauregard. Yeah. But Bragg was Bragg. But again, would he have been able to create some sort of defense for what Grant and Sherman were? And maybe I mean, maybe he would, maybe he wasn't, but he had his issues too. But again, if he survives and sucks and disappears, he's a footnote in history but he's that great what if, what if he didn't give away his tourniquet? And he had it with him, and he didn't bleed to death.
Exactly.
When he got shot.
I thought he had the tourniquet in his pocket.
He gave it away to somebody to help somebody else. And then, of course,
Doesn't
But
have
again,
it.
that's the thing is we'll never know.
No,
And he could have sucked. He could have screwed up. Because Joe, he Davis had his favorites. He had his biggies, and it's tough to say who he would have put in. But again, that's the opinion. You never
yeah.
know.
That's
That's
so
why it's
fun
fun.
about.
That's what's fun. Yeah, like you said, that's what's fun to study this stuff is because there's no right or wrong answer. It's what you think.
Oh, unfiltered historian Tyler's on here. Morning.
Hey, Tyler, what's going on?
Yeah.
I haven't seen
He does
Tyler in a
awesome
while,
stuff.
actually.
I know.
We're supposed to have him on one of these things.
I know.
You know.
Him and his group need to come on here with us sometime.
Yeah.
That was fun when we did that with them that Saturday evening. That was a lot of fun. That was a great discussion.
It was.
Alex said Bragg should have stayed in Richmond as an advisor because his strategic thinking was great. Just get any other guy to lead the tactics. That's so true.
Yeah, I mean, Bragg did good things though, as far as especially getting his men tightening up the morale, the defenses. He was a hard prick. He was. Now, of course, the problem.
Except to his dog.
Right, but I mean, it's tough to make. I mean, we have a friend Jacob who loves Bragg for some friggin' reason. Okay,
but hey, it's one of those run with
but
it.
Even you, as being the Oliver Otis Howard fangirl that you are, okay, there you go. You can admit that he had some shitty moments.
Absolutely.
Bragg, it's tough to defend Tullahoma with him. You just can't.
No.
Now you can defend Chattanooga because that was. You fought, you did your best, you had the high ground, but again, you got pushed back by Thomas. Even though Sherman screwed up, there was a million factors that went to Chattanooga.
Yeah.
But you can't defend Tullahoma. You just can't.
Yeah. No. Tullahoma too was one of the greatest campaigns of the Civil War. And my favorite story is with John T. Wilder and how he goes on that raid, doesn't lose any men.
No, and so we talked before about like some of these. Was Tullahoma a great thing by Rosecrans or a shitty thing by Bragg? It's probably somewhere in the middle.
It's somewhere with anything.
But let me ask you a question. Do you think if Lee's a Tullahoma that Rosecrans has such an easy time?
No.
No, of course not.
But Rosecrans designed the campaign around his opponent, which was smart. And he knew Bragg was not the best, I think. Quick question about Shiloh. I said yes to this, but I want to confirm. So Frank asked, wasn't Sidney Johnson at the front with his men? Doesn't seem like the best place to be as a commander.
He was. He got shot, I think, in the back of the knee.
Yeah, and he didn't have any feeling back there because he had
Right.
nerve damage from a previous injury.
Right.
If you want to read a really sad death, read Jeff Shara's it's the first book. Frank will know what I'm talking about. Some other people. It's the first book in his Western theater series. And Albert Sidney Johnson's a character. And the death is written from his point of view. And it's really sad.
No, and Albert Sidney Johnson was an old blue blood. I mean, don't forget, this is the guy who was in Los Angeles with old Winnie Boy. Right. Yeah. Back when the war was breaking out. And it was Albert Sidney Johnson's wife who was playing the piano and they was singing Kathleen Mulvaney and all those songs. They're sitting around. So he was someone who was a known guy. So his death was a big shock to the system for a lot of people. And, it's tough to say because it could have been a big loss, but we'll never know. I think it probably was. Only because of 50-50, the 2020 hindsight being our benefactor and knowing what they did in the West after that moment. He was in a tough spot. He didn't have enough men to defend that whole area. But at the end of the day, you're taking somebody who was a legit, Army type of leader and replacing. In the Army of Tennessee from that point on was a constant replacement for Johnson of who was going to do it, and they went through a lot of stops and starts.
It was like that from the beginning, though.
I think their best one was Joseph E. Johnson personally.
Yeah, Joseph E. Johnson, and then we'll never know if Beauregard was good, but the biography I read about Beauregard, as we call him, he had a lot more to do with Shiloh than what we're led to believe. And Johnston and he had they had a good relationship, I think, and he had a really good relationship with Joseph E. Johnston.
Right.
That they were friends, but they were also Johnson recognized that Beauregard was good with strategy and all that. But Beauregard's issue was he could not get his head out of the textbook. We'll never know if he would have evolved because he's the great bullpen pitcher that never gets put in kind of thing. Question from Scott, does Bragg get the blame for sending Longstreet from Chattanooga? Was that his control or was it Davis?
Well, you're talking
Longstreet was
about,
like, I'm not going to be able to take command. So you know what? I want to go back to the Eastern Theater.
no, I mean,
Yeah.
I think, are you talking Battle of Knoxville? You talking
Yeah, he
that?
said
Because
like, so no, Scott asked, does Bragg get the blame for sending Longstreet from Chattanooga?
I don't know. I don't know if he was blamed for that. I mean, because after everything went down with Chickamauga and Chattanooga, but they had a real focus of wanting to take Knoxville. And so Longstreet's going to go fight the Battle of Knoxville against Burnside again. He keeps coming up today. And he has that real tough situation where he's going to fight, at that Fort Sanders.
Yeah.
And we talk about that. And the walls the Union's pouring water down the side of the walls because it's frozen. It's all ice. It's like that Game of Thrones thing, right? Yeah. And so, I mean, I don't think that was really to blame. I mean, he wanted to get the hell out of Dodge, but taking Knoxville, I mean, you're talking about this is November 29th, 1863. This is not long after. So yeah. So if they were to take a Knoxville, that's a different story. So I mean, the problem with Longstreet is he loses Knoxville. He loses 3,000 guys.
Yeah.
Union only loses 400, 3,400. And he ends up after Knoxville saying, fuck this. I'm not doing anything. And then he goes back east. He doesn't want to get involved anymore.
No, because he's not able. He goes west thinking he's going to take command. He doesn't get along with Bragg. There is a great scene in the book. Frank just mentioned it, Smoke at Dawn, which is by Jeff Shara. And it's the story of the battles for Chattanooga. And there's a scene where from Claiborne's perspective, where Claiborne goes up to talk to Longstreet, and Longstreet's found out he's going back east, and he's like, sometimes your wildest, like paraphrasing, but Longstreet says something along the lines of, sometimes your wildest dreams do come true. And I'm going.
No, I mean, I think there was a lot of shit that went down. I mean, we talked before about the petition, all the guys signed. Yeah. Longstreet, I think Longstreet went west to get away from Lee with the understanding he was going to take over that army in his mind. And I think Bragg probably said, well, I need to get rid of this guy. Yeah, it's like trading your pain in the ass first baseman who runs his mouth on the media. And I think that's why he sent him to Knoxville. But there was a strategic reason to fight that battle. I think it was a marriage of convenience. I think in a perfect world they would have taken Knoxville, and then things might have been a little bit different. But when they lose Knoxville, he literally sets up winter quarters and says, I'm not going back to this guy. Forget it. Yeah. Screw it. Yeah. But Longstreet, that was not, speaking of bad moments, Knoxville was not a good moment. Burnside pantsed him there.
Oh, yeah. And then, there was a question about that in a Facebook group. Like, why did Longstreet do so bad at Knoxville? And I said, because Breckinridge gave him a bad map. I mean, I was half joking, but also Breckinridge does give him a bad map.
But it was the weather. I mean, they're trying to climb up this earthen parapet of Fort Sanders, and they can't climb because it's all ice. Yeah. They can't. It's like it's like the yodeler in Price is Right. Rest in peace, Bob Barker, by the way. But they can't get up that hill. And is it his fault? I don't know. I mean, Fort Sanders was a good moment for Burnside. People don't really study that, but people don't really study Fort Sanders and Knoxville. But that's a good moment for Burnside, and not a good one for the old war horse. No one talks about that when they talk long. They don't talk Knoxville with Longstreet.
No. So we got a question from Alec. He said he's about to read They Came Only to Die: The Battle of Nashville by Sean Michael Chick. It's written this year, so we'll have to check that out. Never read a book which focuses on just one battle. What can I expect? From what I know about just books that focus on one battle, Alec, a lot of detail and good detail.
Yeah.
If check that book out.
Yeah, I haven't read that. I haven't read that one.
No, but I think he's asking what to expect from just a book that focuses on one battle.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be heavy detail. I mean, Nashville's fascinating because you have the politics with George Thomas, Blackjack Logan, and Grant himself are positioned to come to Nashville.
They've been looking for a way to get rid of Thomas.
You have the USCT guys who fight there, and you have the broken train that is the Army of Tennessee with Hood, because they got Spring Hill, they got hit hard at Franklin, and then by the time they get to Nashville, let us know how that book is when you read that, because one of the fascinating parts of the Battle of Nashville is the retreat out that Hood does.
Yeah.
where they're walking. You know, your parents tell you walk barefoot in the snow uphill both ways to go to
Yeah,
the bus
that
stop.
was the
But
retreat.
that was real. So you're leaving Nashville after you get your asses handed to you. And again, weather, you had to wait a couple of days to do anything because it was snowy out. Hood's retreat out to get back to Birmingham. No, where the hell was it going? It wasn't Birmingham. Was it Birmingham? Where the hell? But he had to retreat out, but that retreat is a fascinating part of that book. I guarantee you, it's in that book. I bet I'd actually guarantee you, but I bet you it is if it's specific on the battle. But it's okay. The USCT guys really get a lot of credit for that one, but Thomas probably deserves more, I think.
Oh, he does. And he doesn't get the credit because he's a Virginian. The other thing I can say about battle specific books is if you read one, make sure you read another, because you're going to get a different point of view on it. For instance, if you only read Sears's book about Gettysburg, you will have a very slanted view on the 11th Corps the first day there. And same with Antietam. If you only read Sears, now Sears is awesome. He knows his shit, but he's very biased against, say McClellan. So for instance, if you only read, what's his book about Antietam called? Landscape Turned Red.
Yeah.
If you only read that book, you are going to come away with a very biased Sears's opinion on Order 191. Mm-hmm. And that's why you have to, when it comes to especially the battles and especially the generals, you have to read more than just one source. And then somewhere the truth is in the middle of that. And you can form your opinions around it.
Well, most of these guys, we've talked about this a million times, most of these writers write their opinions, their slants. I mean, if you're reading the stories, you're reading the authors. If you're reading on a specific battle, whether it be Antietam or Gettysburg, any of them, Nashville, whatever, you're gonna get that writer's opinion. And if you read just the one book, that's going to be your factual. That's going to be what it's going to be. But I'll tell you, some of these battles you read, you wonder if they're talking about the same damn battle.
Yeah.
Maryland campaign is a big one, especially when you read Sears, who is a dyed in the wool McClellan hater and Howard hater, by the way.
Yes. According to him, Howard made the dinosaurs go extinct.
He probably did.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, he had wasn't it Howard that was the one that ordered Polk to be killed?
Oh yeah, exactly.
He was like, and Polk was described as basically waddling away when the artillery started firing.
Yeah, but you're always going to get their spin into it, and that's going to be the problem. Is you're dealing with that. But I mean, if I was going to write a book, like we mentioned the Ireland thing, if I was going to write a book on Ireland, it would be my opinion, my slant on it. Now you could sit here and say you could have a hardcore Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain person. This guy with the mustache, Mary, the other guy from Maine, who would take offense to me saying Culp's Hill was probably more important than Round Top, which I wish is what I would say. And he could write a book on Ireland completely minimizing that. Doesn't mean he's wrong. It just means that's his opinion.
It's his opinion.
And that's why you got to read more than the one source. And you see it a lot with some of these people. And you read some of these books, like I said, you swear they're talking about two different battles by some of them.
Oh yeah, I agree. And the one thing too, this is the reference librarian in me coming out, is, look at the sources they're using, and look at the sources they're not as well, is another way to kind of like, and I know like our friend Joe studies Battle of Franklin and he's awesome, great guy, but he and I disagree over the book 5 Tragic Hours. I like it. He doesn't.
No. Well, he doesn't like Wiley's sword, right?
No. And I like Wiley.
And I think that's the whole thing too. Joe's a good guy, but he's very much drinking the Kool-Aid of Hood. Let's just call it. Okay, he is.
But he knows his stuff, and Hood needs a champion. Let's face it.
He does. Hood does a lot of good things, but again, he's not ready for prime time. He hit his ceiling and he went one step above it. And he was very political with Davis. He wanted that job. He was probably the wrong guy at the wrong. We've said this a million times. Wrong guy, wrong time. Doesn't mean that Hood is bad. Hood's injury at Gettysburg completely screwed up that echelon attack when you have Evander Law and those Alabamans on Big Round Top not knowing he's in charge, and it slowed the whole damn thing down. That's a big loss. He obviously takes another injury at Chickamauga. His body was falling apart. I'm not a big believer in the whole Landrum thing with him.
I think he was suffering from the after effects of it, even though he wasn't taking it anymore. But we know now modern day, that it can have, even after you stop taking opioids, it can have long range effects. Alec just said, thank you for answering the question. He cannot afford to buy multiple books on one subject, but as a history student, I know how people have different opinions. I typed this in the chat, but I'm also going to say as well for everyone here, you know, yes, books are expensive, but if you go to your local library, see if they do what's called interlibrary loan, and you can get the books that way.
Right.
And they'll get them in for you from other libraries. And it's a really great, and it's, you know, 99% of the time, it's actually 100% of the time, it's free. And they'll get the books in for you.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, books are not cheap.
Because we're taught, he hates it as much as I do. I
remember I was reading on somewhere, someone said that somebody was robbed somewhere and lost $10,000 worth of textbooks from a college. And I'm like, damn, that's be tough to replace those 2 books.
Exactly.
You know? And that's the problem. Books are expensive, but using a library, that library card is a pretty,
the library card is amazing because, you know, often libraries will do things like Canopy where you can stream movies. They'll have like Libby, which is for audiobooks. You know, the downside is you sometimes, if it's a popular book, you'll have to wait for it. But there's also interlibrary loan where you can get, you know, books from. I got a book about, or a couple books about Spotsylvania that way. I got the Bragg biography that way. CD, I need to go out and go to the library and take notes like I was back in school. Libraries are amazing. You can get lots of stuff from there.
No, libraries are great because there's a lot of cool stuff you can get, and you know, you're obviously
I'm a librarian.
Yeah. So it kind of tough to bash libraries, but you could take a book out and read it, and the interlibrary loan thing is, you know, is pretty cool. But I mean, admittedly, I'm somebody who I can't go into a bookstore with. I mean, I've been good about it. I've been good lately. I haven't bought a book in a while, but there was a time. See, my Civil War Round Table, you kick in $5 and they give you raffle tickets.
Yeah.
And because it's all old cheap people, nobody does it. And I end up walking away with 5 or 6 books every time I go. And it's really cool because they have a book lottery. But it's fun to read the stuff. And admittedly, there's very few books I've ever read that I don't like, you know. Yeah. Anyway, hey, MJ, she's leaving. I'm reading.
Thank you, MJ.
Thanks again.
Thanks for all you do.
You know, MJ, her Gettysburg, These On Her Dead Facebook page is a good one.
Yes.
But before she jumps off real quick, she has her picnic coming up the weekend. Yes. We're down there. So if you're down at the rec park in Gettysburg, you can go check and go see that. Yes. Maybe MJ will even give you an autograph.
Maybe Major Cushman will be there.
Maybe she might be. We'll see what happens. But it's obviously reading is the key to everything. It really is.
And also questioning what you read and all that, and you know, just to make sure you're reading a lot. Oh, Alex said in Germany it's hard to get. Oh, he's in Germany. Wow. I cannot buy the Rosecrans biography, and our university library is one of the worst. Oh gosh,
that sucks.
Oh, that ebooks. I'm not a fan of ebooks myself. But I mean, ebooks, you might be able to get them that way. I don't either. I like to hold. I like
the buying a book and opening and smelling the. I'm a weirdo like that, but there's something, and it's great to be able to look to read a book and then go back to the book, and especially if we're doing a research for an episode or something like that, it's fun to be able to grab a book and say, I remember this guy talked about it, so go back in the book, and you can find some pretty cool. And I would never do that if it was the if it was ebook. I never would. That's what's cool about it.
I mean, I have ebooks. I've read them before, and I have audiobooks, which I will listen to. I started listening to The Smoke at Dawn again
And you like coloring books too.
I do.
Those pop-up books.
Yeah.
The Howard Centerfold.
Picture books.
You're doing your drawings, you're coloring.
But yeah, like libraries are a great place. I mean, the one where Alec is, his university library, sounds like it's not too great, which is unfortunate, but a lot of them are really great to be able to get books. And two, some of them will they will often have requests for purchase. So if you want them to purchase one, they'll get it for you.
Yeah, there's a local university. I don't know what part of Germany you're in, but sometimes the universities get books for you too.
Yeah. Yeah. And local libraries as well.
Admittedly, I don't know jack shit about Germany as far as how that whole thing goes, but I don't know if they have a similar situation where you can order stuff or not. I'm glad they stopped burning them. I can tell you that about German books. I'm glad that situation's settled. But although here, Just as bad, probably.
I know. Book banning. Ryan said that he hopes things improve for Alec. We desperately need books on the 48ers that actually use German and other European sources for their pre-Civil War careers. Yeah, the 48ers, that's a good study. Like
Yeah.
Schurz and who else? Von Gilsa.
Von Gilsa, Schimmelfennig,
Yeah.
Adolf von Stein. There's a lot of the Prussian. There's a lot of that. And speaking of your 11th Corps, there's a lot of that too. Schurz is probably
48er?
that I don't know. That's a good question. That's probably
Schurz is probably the badass.
Schurz was the one that he's
broke into the prison.
People don't realize how talented Carl Schurz was.
Yeah,
he really was. And when you look at this, we've said before, 1 in every 4 Union soldiers in the American Civil War was from somewhere else. A lot of Germans, a lot of Irish, some Canadians. I hate to say, but I mean, there's that, especially with the 11th Corps, there's that impression that they all sucked. They were all drunken partiers. They were afraid of combat. They all ran like hell. But a guy like Schurz, a guy like Shizanovsky, I know he was from a different area, but a lot of the foreigners who fought, with them, were not the types. I mean, von Gilsa, he kind of took off from East Cemetery Hill, but some of these guys were legit ballers, and they brought a lot to the table when they got here.
Oh, they did. And Schurz is the guy, I think, that broke into that prison to get his commanding officer out. CD says, we talk about the negatives of social media, but the positives are there more accessible resources. I've learned so much following people in groups. I 100% agree. It makes it accessible.
You have to be able to sift through it, because there are some great resources. You can watch lectures on YouTube. You can read people's theses. There's a lot of things you can do. You just have to be able to sift, and you get to separate the people who are telling history to tell the history versus people who are telling the history to promote themselves telling the history. And that's a big part of it, because there are some great people on social media, and there is some legit slime on social media. And the people who are the legit slime are the ones who are going to tell you your opinion's wrong, because you don't have a PhD. Therefore, you're slime. I mean, it's just there are people like that, unfortunately. But there are honestly, social media is
we wouldn't be here without social media and all the people, like the people on here that we've met, and a lot of them in person now, which is really awesome. And we've learned from everybody on here. We have great discussions when we get together, and we have great discussions on here. It has been very, very positive. It's made history more accessible for people. We plan on keeping this podcast free.
It'll always be free. I'll tell you point blank. There'll never be a day anybody pays a nickel for this thing. No. And there's nothing wrong with the people who do the Patreon thing, who do the other thing. But our belief, and this is something we truly, truly believe in, is that history in any way, shape, or form should always be free. It should always be accessible. It should not be behind a paywall, because who are we? We're just people who study and talk with a couple of idiots who talk. I'm a
librarian who just does this in my spare time.
It's I can't imagine, and I get it. Some people do, some people don't. But the more people you can research and you can follow and you can listen to, it's going to create that what they call that intellectual curiosity. So maybe Mary says something about Oliver Otis Howard, and your mind say like, okay, I've heard this guy sucks, but maybe I'll study more about him. And then you'll study more, and it'll kind of create, like I said, that intellectual curiosity to continue your education with it. And the Civil War is truly a field where you can self-study. That's what's cool. This is not like this is MIT or something like that, Goodwill Hunting shit. Either you know it or you don't. You can learn from this. And so the more people you listen to, the more people you read, the better balanced you'll be. But I've always said history's got to be free. It has to be.
Oh, I agree. And too, like, I'd like to think in the last 3 years, I've changed my opinion about stuff, but I'd like to think maybe I've had a positive influence on Howard, with him, and that maybe somebody who didn't like him now studies him and respects him more.
No, I mean, that's as good, as bad, and as ugly. Howard has his great moments. He has his bad moments. There's no question, but you can make that case for everybody. But again, most people, people here who are on this live thing, they know this, but the average person, they don't know anything about they don't know this history. All wrote is Howard versus Ron Howard. They never heard of him before. And if they have, they heard that that's who Stonewall Jackson routed at Chancellorsville. That's all they know about him. I told you before, a military background who studied history his whole life, never heard of the Battle of Monocacy till last weekend.
Yeah.
And that's because it's not taught. The Civil War in this country is still the third rail educationally. I have several friends in high school who teach high school who tell me, I would love to teach Civil War. We just can't. We have a specific curriculum. We talk about the basics of it. We talk about slavery. We talk about Emancipation Proclamation. We talk about Gettysburg. We talk about Appomattox. That's all they talk about. And he goes, I'd love to do it, but you just can't. There's not a lot of colleges who teach Civil War studies anymore.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, the modern political situation we're in right now, it's just no one wants to talk about it, which is too bad because now is the time to talk about it.
And the thing is history needs to make you uncomfortable. That's what it's supposed to do, because you're supposed to study the dark parts of it in order to see, what happened. And if it makes you uncomfortable, you have to ask yourself why. Is it because you're relating to the person? Is it because you're suddenly relating to Patrick Cleburne, even though he fought for the Confederacy? Are you relating to Lew Wallace for some reason and you never did before? Like, the more you study it, the more, you learn the history that's going on now. There's some comments here. Ryan mentions Blanker, Osterhaus, Willich, von Steinwehr, the Pole Joseph Karg joined joined Jersey Cavalry and kicked force at Bolivar. Frank said Mary definitely had influenced a positive opinion on Howard over the past 3 years.
I would agree.
Scott said, you guys have had a huge positive impact on my life. I can't thank you enough. Well, thank you. All of you have had a positive impact on our life too. So thank you for that.
No, I appreciate that. That's it. We just, we like to talk about this. There aren't too many outlets in our lives where we can talk about this. And that's kind of how this whole
thing. And honestly, like
95%
of our conversations are about the Civil War. Like I tell people, like, I live, eat, and breathe this stuff. Like, it's what I do in my spare time. Now, I've had to branch out a little bit more because I'm in school for my master's degree, and I have to read books that aren't Civil War, which is fine. I'm enjoying them. There was a Harper's Ferry reference in the book I'm reading right now, and I got really excited. Frank said, I've learned so much over the past 3 years of this podcast, and it just makes me want to learn more. Well, thank you very much.
No, we appreciate that. And again, if we just want to be an outlet to create that curiosity.
And also too,
that's all it ever was.
Like just way for us to talk about it, hang out during the pandemic, when all of us were stuck at home. But just before we jump off here, because I just realized it's getting close to noon, which is
almost the witching hour.
So we are going to have a roundtable. We haven't had it for a couple months, but basically for anybody new on here, we have a roundtable. Usually it's monthly, but we took the summer off, and it's on Zoom. It's going to be 7:30 Eastern this Wednesday, and basically it's just a place to come and talk about the Civil War. And like, all opinions are fine. Like, don't, you can come on and talk about stuff. It's a great group of people. Civil War Breakfast Club at gmail.com if you want an invite to it. We do have our invite list, but if you're not on it or you're not sure, just send us an email and we will.
If you haven't been before, it's just like this, except it's a whole bunch of people and we all just talk and just shoot the shit. That's all it is. We are going to be doing the next book club, which will be Tom Huntington, who wrote a book called Maine at Gettysburg, which is a great book. Talks about not just the 20th, but also the 16th, the 19th, Moses Lakeman, Charles Tilden. There's a whole, obviously, Greenleaf Stevens, Francis McGilvery. There's a whole bunch of Mainers who fought at Gettysburg we can talk about, and that's coming down the pike as well. So, just be good to everybody, be good to people. Just understand that if somebody pushes back on you, and especially online, and says you're wrong. What's great about history is it's all based on interpretation, and you can have an opinion, an educated opinion that's right, and be just as good as someone who's a PhD or anything like that.
Different interpretation. Right.
It's all interpretation. So you can like your Howard, you can like your Stonewall, you can like anybody you want. And that's what's great about this, is that there's so much gray area. There's so much still meat on the bone to study with this. And stuff is discovered every single day.
And we all learn from each other by talking about it, even if we have different opinions. Bill Etzkorn says, very positive influence on the academic study of the Civil War. Personal and engaging goes a long way. Well, thank you, Bill. You and Cindy are awesome.
Well, and then Bill's got he's got his podcast too, which is really, really cool.
We're gonna have him on here for something too. We're gonna have him on here for
we got to schedule him. We got to get Bill's schedule. So
and CD said, and you all have really fostered a positive and friendly community. It's wonderful. Thank you. That's what we want. It's just something positive where people could come and talk about the Civil War and just not feel like they can't express their opinion, because we hear that from people. Well, I'm too scared to say this because I might get jumped all over. Like, don't be scared. I mean, I made that mistake when I went to Atlanta and I didn't post pictures with Gordon's grave because I thought I was going to get jumped all over.
Your opinion's your opinion. I mean, that's the whole thing is like we said before, we have friends who love Braxton Bragg. We have friends who love Robert E. Lee. We have friends who love
John Bell Hood.
John Bell, and that's that's totally cool. But we even ran into someone who likes Sedgwick, of all people.
That was awesome. Yeah.
But that's how it is.
We ran into somebody like Slocum at Fredericksburg.
But we'll definitely try to do these. And I see some of these comments about people overseas. We'll try to do these earlier if we can.
Yeah.
Sometimes work affects these things, but that's the case. So we're doing Maine at Gettysburg. We're doing Simmons.
We've got to schedule that, and then Lisa as well.
And Lisa Samia, who's down in Franklin, whose absence is very conspicuous today, Mary. Yes. She's always on this, but we realize she's best other stuff she's doing.
That's the truth.
Hopefully having a good time.
I was gonna say it wasn't Sedgwick, it was Slocum. The kid.
That's right. It was Slocum. He was
like this hardcore Slocum fan. I'm like, you do you, kid. Like that.
Except you know what his problem was? He was a Notre Dame graduate. So
I know.
There you go, Notre Dame, Mary.
But he was so enthusiastic about Slocum.
Oh, he was. It was like watching you with Howard.
I was like, geez, Slocum's got a fanboy.
Slocum, though, I mean, I know we're going to jump off. Yep. Slocum, his loss, was he was somebody who actually he was a very well thought of general all the way through.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we talk about Sedgwick and all these other guys, Reynolds, but these guys were there for a reason.
Yeah.
So the problem with Slocum was that he was slow.
And he was a joke.
Well, no, he's a joke.
No, not a joke, but he became like, even Howard jokes around about him in his memoirs. Like he said that.
Well, they called him slow to come Slocum.
Yeah.
But again, a lot of that comes from Gettysburg, and that's all perception versus reality. Was it strange to run into a Slocum fanboy? A little bit. He was a ranger in Fredericksburg or something.
Yeah, and he was like all into it. Like he was like, I love the 12th Corps and Slocum. I'm like, wow. And I go to school. One of my friends, one of my fellow classmates, she's related to Slocum.
Do you remember? And I'm going to jump up in a second. But do you remember when we had Jim Hessler on and to talk about Sickles? He was all ready for a fight, and then you realized we're all on Team Stan Sickles, and he was looking at his face like, "Oh, really?"
Yeah.
like he expected us to push the usual. Pablum, Sickles, destroy the army, was a traitor. And we came back and kind of talked about the Charles Payne map. We talked about and he was like, yeah, oh, okay. Yeah. It was funny. You can see it if you go back and watch the episode, because it's on YouTube, really good. When he realized that we were all on the same side with Sickles. It was just fun. He's a great guy. He has the Battle of Gettysburg podcast. It's really good. His story at the mine where someone threatened to shoot him for insubordination. Yeah, shoot him, Jim. Yeah, not Sickles, Jim. It's a good time. Anyway, let's jump off. We'll get ready. It's almost noontime. This flew today, so we got to roll. So Sunday. Have a great rest of the weekend. So watch the social medias, because we're doing a roundtable this week, right? Yeah, we're gonna. Yep, Wednesday. And I think, and we're gonna try to get the Maine at Gettysburg. We have to get with Huntington and get a schedule with him. So those are the next couple of things that are coming. We're going to do the episode on Cheat Mountain this week, which is fun. It's a fun episode to talk about. We'll do that. Yeah. No one ever studies Cheat Mountain, so we'll do that, and then we'll go from there. So, I guess that's a good place to drop off, I think. Yep. So everyone have a wonderful Sunday. Thank you for the support the last 3 years. Thank you, Lynn. Lynn says happy anniversary. That was fun we've had dinner with her, I think, a couple times now. Yeah, she's cool. She's awesome. We went to the Battlefield Brew Works and heard it. Yeah, that was fun. That's a cool little place in Gettysburg. That's pretty sweet. All right. Well, you guys have a great, safe weekend. Yeah. Thanks for all the support these last 3 years and for hanging out with us in this silly little thing we do. Weekends. And if you can, please come to the round table. I know we'll try for the people overseas. We try to do it early from time to time, but this week is the way it has to be. We have to do it. So maybe next time we'll do it a little bit earlier. Unfortunately, if we do it 5 Eastern, it hurts the people in the Midwest and people like
Yep.
Frank out in California, but
Yep.
you can't satisfy
No,
everybody
maybe
the
we'll do
best
one
you
on the
can.
weekend sometime. Oh, David said he's off to play 1860s baseball.
Oh, very cool. Do you know, real quick, last story, do you know, David, that when managers meet at home plate today in Major League Baseball to talk the ground rules that came from the Civil War? Did I tell that story?
That's cool.
So when you had regiments, so you had some rules. Every state had their own set of rules. New York regiment would play a regiment from Vermont, for example, and they'd get together and talk about the rules. We're going to play with 3 outs. We're going to be able to throw the ball at you. They would compare ground rules, and that stuck. And so when you see a manager talk with the umpires in a major league game today, or a high school game, or a college game, that goes back to the Civil War. It's a tradition that started in the forts.
Cool.
But so there's your Civil War history of baseball. So I always thought that was a cool story. So, all right. So off we go. So guys, we'll talk to you. We'll talk to y'all soon, and we'll have a great rest of the weekend, and we'll see you on the other side.
Yep. Hopefully see some of you Wednesday night or a roundtable. Thank you again for the support. Have a great evening, everybody, or not evening. Have a great day, afternoon, whatever.
That's evening, people over in Europe.
It's evening
Almost,
for
right?
Alec and Ryan. Yep.
All right, guys, stay safe. All right, guys, we'll talk to y'all soon.